In 479 BC, a woman was dragged into a room inside the Persian royal palace. What was done to her was so extreme that the ancient historian who recorded it, a man who had spent his entire life documenting wars, mass executions, and ritual sacrifices across 3 continents, actually paused before writing it down. She was not a criminal. She was not a prisoner of war. She was not a slave. She was royalty, the wife of the king's own brother, a woman from one of the most protected bloodlines on earth. And the order did not come from the king. It came from the queen. But the reason this happened, the specific traceable chain of decisions that placed this woman in that room, began years earlier on a battlefield 1,000 miles away, with a king who had just suffered the most public humiliation of his life and simply could not accept what he had become. Before this story is over, a sacred oath will be weaponized. A hand-woven robe will function as a confession that nobody can deny. A royal birthday celebration will become an inescapable trap, and an entire branch of the Persian royal family will be wiped from existence, not by a foreign army, not by revolution, but from the inside by the very people who shared the same blood. And the man who set all of it in motion will be murdered in his own bed by the men he trusted to protect him while he slept. But to understand what happened inside that palace, you first need to understand what happened outside of it. In 480 BC, Xerxes I launched the largest military operation the ancient world had ever seen. Even conservative modern estimates place his combined forces at over 200,000 men. For context, most Greek city-states could field armies numbering only in the low thousands. Sparta's entire military citizen class was fewer than 10,000 men. Xerxes was not simply invading Greece. He was planning to erase it entirely. He had inherited this campaign from his father, Darius I, who had been defeated at Marathon in 490 BC and died before he could launch a second attempt. Xerxes took the project personally. He spent 4 full years preparing for it. He ordered a canal dug through the peninsula of Mount Athos so his fleet would not repeat the route that had destroyed his father's ships. He had pontoon bridges constructed across the Hellespont. When a storm demolished the first set of bridges, Xerxes ordered the water itself whipped and branded with hot irons. That detail is often presented as madness, but it was not. It was theater. Xerxes ruled an empire containing dozens of ethnic groups and languages, and his authority rested entirely on the perception that he operated on a completely different plane than ordinary men. Punishing the sea was a direct message aimed at his own army, and for a time that message held. His forces crossed into Europe. At Thermopylae, a Greek rear guard led by 300 Spartans held a narrow mountain pass for 3 days before being outflanked and destroyed. Xerxes pushed south. Athens was evacuated and burned. Greece appeared to be collapsing. Then came Salamis. The Greek fleet lured the Persian navy into a narrow strait. The passage was far too tight for Persian ships to maneuver properly. Vessels collided with one another. Command signals could not reach the outer formations. The Greeks tore the fleet completely apart. Xerxes watched all of this from a golden throne positioned on a hillside directly above the strait. He had placed it there deliberately, so that every captain, every oarsman, every marine in his fleet would understand that the king himself was watching, that their performance was being observed by the one man who could elevate or destroy them with a single word. Now that same throne forced him to watch as his ships rammed each other, capsized, and burned. When the battle ended, the Greek fleet controlled the strait. The supply line connecting the Persian army to Asia was severed. Without the navy, the land campaign could not survive the coming winter. Xerxes made a decision that would define everything that followed. He left. He did not stay to regroup. He did not attempt to rebuild the fleet. He withdrew from Greece entirely, leaving his general Mardonius behind with a land army of roughly 80,000 men. That army fought on for another year before being completely destroyed at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC. Xerxes never returned to Greece. He never launched another Western campaign. And that fact, the withdrawal, and the long silence that followed it, the 14 years of inward retreat, is where this story truly begins. Xerxes was not deposed. The Persian Empire was still the largest political entity on earth, stretching from Libya to the Indus Valley and containing roughly 1/3 of the entire world's population. But empires do not run on territory alone. They run on perception. Xerxes had crossed the Hellespont with an explicit promise of conquest. He came back without it, and in a court system where the king's authority was directly tied to divine favor, where the reigning monarch was presented as the chosen instrument of Ahura Mazda, the god of truth and cosmic order. Military failure was not merely a setback, it was a theological problem. Nobody said this openly. Persian court culture simply did not permit direct criticism of the king. But the behavioral shifts were clearly visible. Governors began consolidating regional power. Tribute payments slowed. The network of royal informants reported growing independence among provincial administrators. Inside the palace itself, the change took on a different character entirely. Xerxes withdrew from military campaigns completely. For the remaining 9 years of his reign, he launched no major operations. He turned instead to construction, expanding Persepolis, commissioning elaborate stone reliefs, emphasizing his divine titles and his connection to the gods. And he also turned inward, toward the internal life of the court. A king who has lost his external stage will often try to reclaim authority on the internal one. And Xerxes' internal stage was a palace filled with family members, servants, and nobles whose positions depended entirely on his favor. One person in particular caught his attention. Xerxes had a brother named Masistes. Masistes was not a peripheral figure. He had commanded troops during the Greek campaign and governed Bactria, the strategically critical province covering parts of what is now Afghanistan and Central Asia. He was royalty by blood, military by career, and politically significant by position. He was also married, and Xerxes wanted his wife. This is recorded directly in Book 9 of Herodotus' Histories. Xerxes pursued the wife of Masistes. She refused him, the king of the Achaemenid Empire, the man who controlled the largest army, the largest treasury, and the largest administrative network in the world. And this woman, whose name Herodotus does not even bother to record, simply said no. Xerxes did not force the issue, but not out of any moral hesitation. Herodotus gives no indication that ethics played any part in his thinking at all. The reason was entirely strategic. Masistes had troops. He had regional authority. He had the loyalty of one of the most militarily capable provinces in the entire empire. Taking his wife by force would be a direct act of aggression against Masistes himself, and that would create a problem Xerxes could not afford, not after Greece, not with the court already watching him closely. So the king changed his strategy. He would not go directly after what he wanted. He would rearrange the board until what he wanted was within reach. The tool he chose was marriage. He arranged for his eldest son, Crown Prince Darius, to marry the daughter of Masistes, a woman named Artaynte. Royal families in the ancient Near East married within themselves routinely. The Achaemenid dynasty in particular practiced endogamy, keeping bloodlines, wealth, and political alliances consolidated tightly within the ruling house. Nobody would have questioned the match. It looked exactly like standard dynastic maintenance. But the true purpose was not consolidation. The purpose was proximity. By bringing Artaynte into the crown prince's household, Xerxes pulled Masistes' entire family physically closer to the royal court, closer to the palace, closer to him. The original target, the mother, was now accessible through the social obligations that naturally came with having a daughter inside the king's own household. Family visits, court ceremonies, seasonal relocations between Susa and Persepolis. Xerxes had engineered a perfectly legitimate reason for her to be near him, without anyone suspecting his actual motives. But proximity has a way of rearranging intentions. Bridges carry traffic in both directions, and the access Xerxes had so carefully created produced an outcome he had never planned for. His fixation shifted. It moved from the mother to the daughter, Artaynte herself, the woman who had just married his own son. Herodotus does not narrate a seduction. He simply records the results. Xerxes and Artaynte began an affair. His son's wife, his brother's daughter, his daughter-in-law, every one of those relationships carried its own distinct category of violation, familial, political, and dynastic all at once. And unlike her mother, Artaynte did not refuse. Why? The honest answer is that we do not know. Herodotus does not give her any interior voice. She may have genuinely desired the king. She may have feared him. She may have recognized an opportunity. In a court where a woman's security depended entirely on male favor, proximity to the most powerful man alive was not a sentimental decision. It was a calculation for survival. Or she may have had no real choice at all. The historical record simply does not tell us. What the record does tell us is that the affair continued in secrecy for a period Herodotus does not specify. The court either did not notice or deliberately chose not to see. In palaces where a single wrong observation could end a life, strategic blindness was a professional skill. But secrecy requires discipline, and Xerxes lacked it. He made a promise he could not take back. During one of their private encounters, he swore a royal oath to Artaynte. She could ask him for anything she wanted, and he would grant it without question. In the Achaemenid system, royal oaths carried the full weight of religious authority. They invoked Ahura Mazda directly, the supreme deity whose continued favor was the very thing that legitimized the king's rule. Breaking such an oath was not merely embarrassing, it was an act of cosmic disorder. It undermined the entire framework that made the king in the first place. Xerxes made the oath fully expecting a manageable request, perhaps gold jewelry, perhaps an estate somewhere beautiful. Artaynte asked for the robe he was wearing. This was not just any garment, it was a specific, identifiable piece, hand-woven by Queen Amestris herself as a personal gift to the king. The entire court knew this robe. When Xerxes wore it, it communicated a message that was visible to absolutely everyone around him. The queen made this for me. We are united. If Artaynte wore it, every single layer of that message inverted completely. The queen's own creation draped across the body of Ve. Another woman, there was no room for interpretation. There was no possibility of denial. The robe was a confession woven into silk. Xerxes understood this immediately. He tried desperately to undo it. He offered Artaynte real cities, actual revenue-generating cities she could personally govern. He offered unlimited gold. Herodotus records that he even offered her an entire army under her personal command. Artaynte refused everything. She wanted the robe, only the robe. Nothing else would satisfy her. There are two possible readings of this moment. The first is that Artaynte was simply reckless, that she wanted the most impressive object within her sight and did not stop to calculate what it would ultimately cost her. The second reading is that she understood precisely what she was doing. The robe was not a trophy, it was a mechanism. As long as the affair remained secret, she was disposable. The moment it became visible to the entire court, she became an undeniable fact that everyone would have to accommodate. Herodotus does not tell us which reading is correct, but Xerxes handed over the robe because in Persia a king could override a law, a king could override a law, a king could override a sacred oath. The robe changed hands, and the countdown began. Amestris saw the robe on Artaynte. She did not scream, she did not confront anyone. She did not go to Xerxes. She waited. Amestris was not simply the king's wife. She was the daughter of Artaynte, one of the 7 noble conspirators who had overthrown the false king Masistes and placed Darius I on the throne. Her political position was independently inherited, entirely separate from her marriage to Xerxes. She had deep alliances among the old nobility that predated the marriage by years. She had her own network of informants, her own leverage throughout the court, and her entire position rested on one fundamental principle. The queen could not be publicly humiliated without a response following. This was not vanity. In the Persian court, where dozens of women competed constantly for the king's attention, a queen's power was maintained through the visible understanding that challenging her carried severe consequences. The moment that understanding collapsed, every ambitious woman, every rival family, and every faction looking for a new patron would immediately begin repositioning themselves. Amestris did not see that robe and feel betrayed. She saw it and identified a threat, and then she made a decision that reveals more about how court power actually functions than almost anything else Herodotus ever recorded. She did not target Artaynte. She targeted Artaynte's mother, the wife of Masistes. Herodotus says Amestris believed the mother had orchestrated the entire affair, that she had deliberately pushed Artaynte toward the king in order to elevate their branch of the family. Whether Amestris genuinely believed this, or simply found it strategically useful to believe, whether it was real suspicion or convenient justification, the record cannot tell us. What the record does tell us is that she did not act immediately. She did not act on impulse at all. She looked at the calendar and waited for one specific day. Once a year, on the king's birthday, Persian royal custom required the king to grant any request made during the royal birthday feast. This was not optional. It was embedded in the ritual structure of the monarchy itself. Refusing a request made on that day, especially one made openly by the queen before the assembled court, would be a visible violation of tradition, severe enough to damage the king's own legitimacy in front of everyone who mattered. Amestris had been waiting for exactly this day. During the feast, in front of the assembled nobles, the priests, the milliers, tarry commanders, and the provincial governors, she made her request. She asked for the wife of Masistes to be handed over to her. Every single person in that room understood immediately what that meant. Xerxes understood what it meant. He tried to stop it. He pleaded with Amestris privately, pulling her aside during the feast itself, desperately trying to redirect her request, offering alternatives and other forms of recognition and satisfaction. Amestris did not move. She had chosen her request. She had chosen her timing. She had chosen her audience. She was not negotiating with anyone. Xerxes then left the feast and went directly to Masistes. Without explaining the affair, without revealing the queen's plan, without disclosing any part of the actual danger approaching his family, he urgently told his brother to divorce his wife, to let her go voluntarily. He offered to arrange a far better marriage as a replacement. He offered his own daughter as a substitute wife for Masistes. Think carefully about what that means. The king of the Persian Empire was offering his own child to his brother as a trade, trying to remove the target before the weapon could land, and he could not even explain why without exposing everything. Masistes refused. He had absolutely no idea what was happening. Nobody had told him about the affair, about the robe, or about the queen's plan. He loved his wife. He saw no reason to abandon her based on the vague, inexplicable urgings of a brother who refused to give a straight answer. And Xerxes, trapped between a birthday custom he could not violate, a wife who had completely outmaneuvered him, and a brother who would not cooperate with a rescue he did not even know was being attempted, gave his consent. He handed the woman over. The man who commanded the largest empire in human history had been maneuvered into granting permission for something he actively did not want to happen. The oath to Artaynte had stripped his control over the secret. The birthday custom stripped his control over the consequences. The very tools of his own authority had been turned against him by a woman who understood those tools far better than he did. The wife of Masistes was taken into Amestris's custody. What followed was systematic and deliberate physical destruction. Herodotus records the mutilation in specific detail. Body parts were severed, targeted deliberately at features that carried social identity, that communicated status, that allowed full participation in public life. She was not killed. She was left alive, conscious, and then returned, carried back through the corridors of the palace, past the same guards, the same servants, and the same officials who had watched her walk in whole. This was not conducted in secrecy. It was not a quiet disappearance that could be conveniently denied later. The woman was sent back into the visible world, permanently marked, undeniable, and impossible for anyone to ignore. Because the purpose was not only to destroy one woman, the purpose was to install a message deep in the mind of every single person who laid eyes on her, every noblewoman considering her own ambitions, every rival family weighing its options, every faction quietly looking for a crack in the queen's authority. The message required no words. It was written permanently on a human body. This is what happens. The wife of Masistes had not conducted any affair. She had actually rejected Xerxes when he first approached her. By every indication in the historical record, she had done absolutely nothing to invite what was done to her. The target was chosen not for guilt. The target was chosen for maximum visibility. Masistes was a governor. His wife was widely known throughout the court. Her condition would be seen, discussed, and remembered across every corridor of the palace and far beyond it. And that was precisely the point. When Masistes saw what had been done to his wife, his response was immediate. He did not petition the king. He did not seek any form of mediation or official remedy. He gathered his sons, gathered his entire household, and turned east toward Bactria. His plan was to raise the province in open revolt against Xerxes, to use his position as governor, his military experience, and the full legitimate weight of his grievance to assemble a force capable of challenging the throne itself. For the first time, the private scandal had crossed directly into imperial security. A governor with royal blood, military credentials, regional loyalty, and a completely justified reason for fury was marching toward an army he personally controlled. If he reached Bactria, the situation became a civil war. Xerxes did not send envoys. He did not open any negotiations. He did not offer any form of compensation. He sent soldiers. Fast-moving cavalry units were dispatched with a single instruction. Masistes and his sons were intercepted on the road before they could reach Bactria. They were killed. All of them. An entire branch of the Achaemenid royal family, a brother, his sons, their households, removed entirely from existence, not in battle, not by foreign invasion, not by disease, by a sequence of decisions that started with one man hearing the word no and deciding he simply could not accept it. After the killings, the Persian Empire continued to function. Taxes were collected, armies were maintained. Construction at Persepolis moved steadily forward. The administrative machinery that Darius I had built was robust enough to absorb internal bleeding without any visible collapse from the outside. But the court had witnessed something that could not be unwatched. The king manipulated by his own cue. Storms. Unable to protect a member of his own family from a punishment he had never sanctioned, ordering the execution of his own brother, not over a policy dispute, not over treason, but over a personal scandal that he himself had initiated in the first place. For the Persian nobility, men who staked their careers and their entire families' futures on the stability of the throne, this was information. It told them that proximity to the king was no longer any guarantee of safety, that loyalty could be overridden at any moment by personal impulse, that the rituals designed to stabilize the monarchy could be weaponized by anyone clever enough to understand how they worked. When that kind of information enters a court, it does not leave. It sits quietly at the back of every conversation. It shapes every calculation. It permanently changes the answer to the question that every person near power is always privately asking. Am I safe here? For 14 years, that question circulated through the palaces at Susa and Persepolis. In 465 BC, the answer finally arrived. Xerxes was assassinated in his own bedchamber. The man who killed him was Artaynte, commander of the royal bodyguard, the man whose entire institutional function was to keep the king alive while he slept. He was aided by Amestris, a court eunuch who controlled all physical access to the king's private chambers. Consider the geometry of that for a moment. The two people with the most intimate access to the king in the entire world, the man who guarded his door and the man who held its key, coordinated his death together. These were not outsiders. These were not rebels riding in from some distant province. These were the innermost circle. The men who dressed him, the men who walked silently beside him, the men who stood guard in the darkness while he slept. And if you found this story as fascinating as I did, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. There are many more stories exactly like this one waiting for you, and you will not want to miss them.